That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, seems like every single time I sit down, I am updating these dynasty rankings, and I don't want to complain. I definitely think this is a much better time of year than what we were going to have in summer, where we're just counting the days until we get the NFL season. I mean, it's funny that March Madness is supposed to be a thing right now, and literally the only thing I've cared about all week is free agency. But of course, I'm going to be diving in depth on this Davonte Adams deal, and in particular, why I think that Hunter Renfro is dead in Dynasty. Hunter Renfro is dead in your fantasy football leagues for 2022. Now, of course, I know we're going to have some people that get upset with me in this video. Let me go to my initial reaction, the video that I made right after we had the trade, and my God, we already have some funny people coming out, and this comment has a decent amount of likes. We're an hour into this comment. Someone says, "You're a Renfro hater. Keep sleeping. Adams is going to open up this offense." Yada, yada, yada. The usual topics of conversation when an alpha wide receiver goes to a new team and someone's trying to convince themselves, "Oh no, this is good for the guy that I have on my roster." I mean, someone else joins in on the conversation with the replies, says, "Exactly. Think Randy Moss and Wes Welker. Renfro just got a bump in my opinion." I am going to dive into exactly why this is such a bad way to go about this trade with your reaction, with your takeaway, and how we should be taking advantage of people who think this way, and we should be going and selling Hunter Renfro. I don't want to say hi because, of course, 9 out of 10 people here know that Hunter Renfro's value just took a hit. But I want to dive into exactly how much of a hit I think that is. And I'll say right now, I'll get into my exact rankings at the end of the video. He's a borderline wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. But before we get into anything, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment letting me know why I am wrong. I'm an idiot. I am wrong all the time. Let me know that in the comment section, but I need an explanation, not just saying, "Mason, you're ugly. You don't know what you're talking about." While that may be true, let me know why I don't know what I'm talking about. And also subscribe to the channel if somehow you haven't already. But let's go into this and let's dive into the impact that Davonte Adams will have for this Las Vegas Raiders offense. And of course, before we project anything on, we have to look at Davonte Adams, the player. We have to go through and not only look at the raw counting stats, because of course, from an initial reaction standpoint, it's easiest for me to go out there and pull up Davonte Adams, his points per game, and try to talk through how that's going to make an impact in Las Vegas. No, if it was that easy, of course, everybody would be a winning dynasty fantasy football player. You have to look at the underlying numbers, contextualize them within the offense he was playing in. And what I want to be primarily focusing in on will be the fact that Davonte Adams is a black hole in this Green Bay Packers offense with his target share. Now, if you don't know what target share is, essentially what you do is you take the targets the receiver has in that offense, you divide it by the passing attempts of that offense, and that's the percentage of targets that that receiver accounted for his team. Now, I think that's, a little too basic, because what ends up happening when you go down that rabbit hole is you end up just saying, "Oh, well, these guys that played 16, 17 games, well, all of a sudden, they're going to have a very high target share compared to everybody else." Of course, that's going to be the case. So instead, I am going to be manually going in there with my little calculator and changing everything to per game numbers. I'm going to be looking at per game targets, per game pass attempts, and doing the math on my own calculator. So of course, for the effort, for the time, it took me hours to research for this. Drop that like. But let's go through. Let's dive into this. In 2021, Davonte Adams, 10.5 targets a game. That's over 30% of his team's targets, 30.28% to be exact. He goes out there, 97 receiving yards a game as well. That's almost 40% of the passing yards on a per game basis went to Davonte Adams. That's absurd. We go to 2020. The same thing here, almost identical. He goes 10.64 targets a game. That's 32% of the team's passing production essentially being funneled through Davonte Adams, 32.34. Then in 2019, 29.55. still at the very top of the NFL. In 2018, 28.16 at the very top of the NFL. If we look at this 4-year average for Davonte Adams, I mean, he is averaging a target share of 30.09% over the past 4 seasons. 30.09%. There is a reason Davonte Adams is the highest paid receiver in the NFL. There's a strong argument to be made that, oh, Mason, Davonte Adams, are we sure he's... No, there's a strong argument to be made that Davonte Adams is the best receiver in the NFL. And I think that almost all these numbers point to that. Because with these target share numbers, you can't use the excuse, oh no, Davonte Adams, he wouldn't be anything without Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, the efficiency on a per target basis would be way down without Aaron Rodgers. Instead of Davonte Adams being a top 3 wide receiver every single year with his points per game output, instead, maybe he would be the wide receiver 7, the wide receiver 8, the wide receiver 9 if he had a mediocre quarterback. I mean, having the elite talent at the receiver position combined with the elite quarterback play, that's what gives you the best wide receiver in fantasy. Okay, so let's put that out there right now. I understand that Rodgers propped up Davonte Adams to a certain degree, but with these underlying target numbers, a lot of this was just Davonte Adams himself. Now, what I also want to do, because we are going to be looking at the wide receiver 2 now, the wide receiver 3 for the Las Vegas Raiders later on in this video. Let's contextualize what Davonte Adams was going up against throughout this 4-year span where he averaged over 30% of his team's targets on a per game basis. In 2021, the second leading receiver on this team on a per game basis was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Marquez Valdes-Scantling finished as the wide receiver 55. In 2020, Allen Lazard was the wide receiver 2 on a per game basis. Allen Lazard finished exactly as the wide receiver 55. This is a little bit weird, but stick with me. In 2019, Allen Lazard was also the wide receiver 2 on this offense, who finished as the wide receiver 92. And in 2018, Randall Cobb was the wide receiver 2 on this offense, and he finished as the wide receiver 55. I know that's very weird that 3 of those placements were there. Random. We are looking at weeks 1 through 16 if you want to fact check me. Now, if we average all this together, the average wide receiver 2, while Davonte Adams is accounting for over 30% of his team's targets, was the wide receiver 64 in fantasy. Now, I know what you're thinking, and trust me, I'm right there with you. But Mason, Hunter Renfro is better than these guys. I agree. So, you know what we should do? We should go and project Davonte Adams to have a lower target share than what he's had over the past 4 years. Because over the past 4 years, Davonte Adams has averaged over 30% of his team's targets. And that's been up against no competition whatsoever. He has a great pass-catching running back in Aaron Jones. There are a lot of depth wide receivers around him, but I mean, really beyond that, there's no solidified second option. So now that he's going over to this offense that has Darren Waller, I don't want to make an argument that Hunter Renfro's extremely talented. We'll get to that near the end, but he has other weapons around him. So this target share number is going to go down. Now, I think it's really hard for us to go out there and project it to drop 5 points or so down to about 25% of this team's offense. So we are going to be a little conservative. We're going to drop it down to 28%. And hear me out. There's a reason why we're doing this. Because what I want to do is I want to go and look at the entire NFL over the past 5 seasons and identify every wide receiver. Yes, I did this all by hand. Every wide receiver that has had a target share over 28% or at least 28%. And what I want to do is A, see who that wide receiver was to get an idea of the talent level of the player, and B, more importantly, look at the production that was left outside of that player in that offense, because these black holes, they will soak up everything. They won't allow really anybody else, if they are to a certain caliber, to have fantasy production. So let's go season by season and let's just name these guys off. In 2021, we have Cooper Kupp, Davonte Adams getting to 28%. In 2020, Davonte Adams, the only guy. In 2019, you had Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, and Davonte Adams. 2018, DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Thomas. 2017, you had DeAndre Hopkins, yet again, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, and Davonte Adams. Davonte Adams was in both 2018, 2017, of course. Can't leave him out. So you see that this is the who's who of wide receiver. I mean, the wide receiver position clearly, has that direct correlation with their talent and the target share they're able to account for in their offense. But what I also want to do is I want to go through and check out how much production was left over for the other options. Because obviously there are some names on this list that stand out. Like in 2021, we just saw it. Cooper Kupp goes out there, dominates, has one of the best wide receiver seasons of all time. Yet Robert Woods was able to be the wide receiver 19 on a per game basis before his injury. That's significant. So Robert Woods, let's throw him up there as wide receiver 19. That's very promising for Hunter Renfro and these other options going forward. But then we check Davonte Adams. He had Marquez Valdes-Scantling as the wide receiver 55. In 2020, Allen Lazard next to Davonte Adams, wide receiver 55. 2019, Michael Thomas, his companion, Ted Ginn Jr., 96, wide receiver 96. DeAndre Hopkins in 2019, next to a stud receiver in Will Fuller. Keep in mind, per game basis, taking out injuries, Will Fuller, wide receiver 40. That same season, Davonte Adams had Allen Lazard as the wide receiver 92. 2018, DeAndre Hopkins playing alongside, he had Randall Cobb, he had Will Fuller in this offense, but they didn't play 8 games in this season, and we met the minimum threshold at 8 games. So his second option, Demaryius Thomas, wide receiver 50. Odell Beckham Jr. was with Sterling Shepard, wide receiver 42. Michael Thomas, Traquan Smith, wide receiver 88. Davonte Adams, Allen Lazard, wide receiver 92. Now, 2017, DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, wide receiver 33. Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver 19. Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, wide receiver 31. Michael Thomas, Ted Ginn Jr., wide receiver 41. And then Randall Cobb, wide receiver 55. So if my math is correct, I believe we have 15 finishes out of all these players that were able to get this mark over the past 5 seasons. So that's on average 3 per year. And out of those 15 finishes, you've seen 2 wide receivers be able to crack the top 24. And those 2 players were Robert Woods this past season before his injury and Juju Smith-Schuster his rookie year in 2017. Now we need to look at the overall context of these offenses. And in 2021, when Robert Woods was able to be that top 24 wide receiver, Matthew Stafford was 3rd in the NFL in passing this season. Now, I know Derek Carr is underrated. I know everybody loves Derek Carr. Are you projecting Derek Carr to be a top 3 passing quarterback? Then in 2017, Big Ben, I know our last memory of Big Ben is just, a complete dust ball. But no, Big Ben, top 5 in the NFL in passing this year. So if you were going to get a receiver that's a black hole level player like DeAndre Hopkins, like Michael Thomas, like Davonte Adams, if you were going to get their wide receiver 2 to be a top 24 option, you have to have a top 5 passing offense. And also, you can't have another option outside of those 2 guys, which is not the case in Las Vegas, not the case to be even close. Now, if we pull up what we had in 2021 from the Las Vegas Raiders, now, of course, some of this information is going to look a little wacky. Hunter Renfro was a low-end wide receiver 2 this season, which is why a lot of people are excited about Hunter Renfro going forward. But we need to look at the context of this because Darren Waller was injured in week 12. And Darren Waller, getting injured, obviously Henry Ruggs going to prison, that let up some targets to be open for the taking in this offense. Very similar to what we saw with Amon-Ra St. Brown at the end of the season in Detroit. So what I want to do is I want to look before week 12 for Hunter Renfro, particularly weeks 1 through 11, where Hunter Renfro was the wide receiver 30. Now, of course, this is because Darren Waller is above Hunter Renfro in the pecking order. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble here, but Darren Waller, 8.5 targets per game. Hunter Renfro, 7.2 this past season. Now, beyond this, why I really want to take note is there was nobody else on this step chart. Nobody at all. That's why you had Hunter Renfro taking that step forward near the end of the season, because his competition for targets was Josh Jacobs, Zay Jones, and Bryan Edwards, who were the next leading options on this team with their targets per game. That's going to be very different. Think about the production. Think about plugging Hunter Renfro into your starting lineup at the end of this last season. He was going up against Josh Jacobs and Zay Jones to get targets. Now, he will be going up against Davonte Adams and Darren Waller. A little bit of a different story, even if Davonte Adams comes in and makes this a much more productive offense overall, which he will. Derek Carr will be a better passing option with Davonte Adams in this offense. I am fine saying that. How much of a step forward does this entire offense need to take for Hunter Renfro to still be viable? He was a wide receiver 3 in this offense without Davonte Adams taking 1,500 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns. Now, if we go to 2020, we see the same thing here. And I know Hunter Renfro, somewhat new to the NFL. He was drafted in 2019, that same class as A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Hollywood Brown, yada, yada, yada. But in that 2019 class, Hunter Renfro came out at an extremely old age. Hunter Renfro came out at 24 years old. He stayed 5 years at Clemson. He turned 24 his rookie season. So Hunter Renfro had his sophomore year in the NFL at 25. Okay, so I don't think we need to say, oh, he needed time to break out. Mason, come on. Give him until he's 26 to break out. That's not how it works at the receiver position anymore. 25 years old, Darren Waller, over 9 targets a game. Nelson Aguilar had more targets than Hunter Renfro at 5.1, where Hunter Renfro came in at 4.8. So I am of the opinion that Hunter Renfro is not a special player. I'm sorry to say that, but if you're 25 years old and Nelson Aguilar is drawing more targets per game than you are, and you're getting doubled by Darren Waller in this same offense with your targets per game, I'm going to assume that at best, you were the 4th option in this offense. Option 1, Davonte Adams. Option 2, Darren Waller. Option 3, run the ball with Josh Jacobs. Then you got Hunter Renfro way down there at the bottom. So if I'm trying to project going forward, what is Hunter Renfro's actual ceiling outside of a Davonte Adams injury? I'm having a hard time seeing him even crack, I don't want to say the top 36, but cracking the top 30. Just because even if, which will happen, I'm going to say Derek Carr is going to take a step forward. But that step forward is going to be with Davonte Adams and Darren Waller. This isn't the 2007 Patriots. You don't need to be comparing this to Randy Moss and Wes Welker. I'll tell you right now. I hate to be the wet blanket here, but Hunter Renfro is not as talented as Wes Welker. And I know this is going to be very controversial, but Derek Carr, I hate to say this, is not as talented as 2007 Tom Brady. Now, if you can hear me out on this one, this is why I have decided to move Hunter Renfro down significantly in our rankings. He was the wide receiver 38 before this was done. Already pretty low for Hunter Renfro, lower than consensus. We had him directly behind Rashad Bateman, Chase Claypool, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, and in the same tier as Christian Kirk and Kadarius Toney. Well, since then, we've had to move him down, and now he is not only behind Christian Kirk and Kadarius Toney, but he's also behind Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams, Brandon Cooks, George Pickens, Cortland Sutton, Allen Robinson, and Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't think you can make an argument, really, to have Hunter Renfro over those other options, given the ceiling that you could find with those receivers. So I hate to say it, but he's not young. He's not going to keep improving. He is going to be the 4th option on his team that shouldn't be a top 3 passing offense in the NFL. Let me know what I'm missing here with Hunter Renfro, but I think people are just always excited to go down there and just root for their guys they got off the waiver wire. Say, I found gold. I'm going to have a top 24 wide receiver every single year going forward with Renfro. The math doesn't check out. Let me know what I'm missing. Of course, while you're down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, even though I know people are probably going to hate this video. It's my job. Got to go out there, be the rain on everyone's parade, and let people know that the Hunter Renfro 2021 season is just going to be a flash in the pan now that you have Davonte Adams there. But of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something from it, and I hope that you have a great day.